Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and it's game week. I will give you guys a little bit of a heads up. I am under the weather. I had a fever earlier and just wanted to record this just to put out an episode before the South Carolina game. I am going to cover the Oklahoma game as well as the South Carolina game that is upcoming. But if my voice is gone, I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to do my absolute best. So, like I said, we're going to cover these. Plan to have another episode come out later this week to break down South Carolina, as well as look ahead to the Texas A&M game for Alabama. That's going to be happening this weekend. So just a heads up, that is what the plan is. But let's get right in the show. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through Oklahoma real quick. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter episode. But Alabama played Oklahoma last weekend. And unfortunately, I was not in attendance. I was a groomsman for my buddy from college's wedding. But Alabama really put it all together. Alabama's offense looked about as good as it has all season. It really felt like Alabama kind of was able to impose its will down low. We talked about this a little bit in the podcast as well as the write-up for this game, that Oklahoma just does not have the interior presence, and I was curious how that was going to be. Also, we had talked a little bit about how Jeremiah Fears was the leader of this team and was, the main scorer and such. And honestly, for the first half, Alabama was able to keep him in check. He ends up scoring 16 points. Ends up having a pretty decent game. But the real difference in this game was they just didn't get anything off the bench, right? It's something that I know, obviously, with Alabama, you're going to see a lot of bench production just because of how deep they are. But Oklahoma just gets 5 points from the bench, and that's not a great recipe for beating an Alabama team when Alabama's playing at its best. And in this game, I feel like Alabama really was playing some of its best basketball. Alabama ends up scoring 38 points from its bench. Was it the best three-point shooting night of the year? No. You still only shoot 31%. But you're just super efficient, right? And the big difference in this game was Alabama dominated the glass. Alabama had more offensive rebounds than Oklahoma had defensive. Alabama just absolutely dominated the glass, and the size as well as the lack of rebounding was really the difference in this game, right? When Alabama was able to get second chance points and, get their own miss, go back up with it. Alabama has 20 assists. Would have been a little more if you make a few more shots, but, Alabama has 20 assists. And it just was kind of a point where Alabama was able to be super successful in this game, off of the glass and in the paint, right? I thought that this was going to be a big point. LeBaron Philon was one of my players to watch. Philon does have a pretty good game. He has 16 points, 5 assists, 2 steals, 4 rebounds. Has a very efficient game. Mark Sears didn't shoot well from deep, but overall has a double-double with assists and points. Grant Nelson, another double-double with points and rebounds. That's really been kind of the key of this team is the rebounding that you're getting out of Grant Nelson. Mark Sears is playing a little bit more within himself and looks a little bit better at distributing the ball here recently. And I saw a stat like over his last 6 games, Mark shooting over 38% from 3, where he started out the season like 28%, as well as he's averaging more over 20 points a game now, and he was at like 15, 16, right? So Mark is playing his best as he's gone into, as he's getting into SEC play, and I think that that's something that you really want to see moving forward. The other thing that I think you want to note is Darion Reed and Houston Millette. So Darion does play in this game and is able to contribute a decent bit. He plays 15 minutes, is able to put up 11 points. Houston Millette is coming off of illness, so he does not play as much in this game. I think that's okay. It's not, something that you really need to worry too much about. But I would be curious to see how much he plays kind of moving forward. And, against some of the different competition, I think that Millette, Diabate, Aiden Sherrill are all going to be three guys that are going to be kind of played sparingly, but played bigger minutes in certain games, right? Potentially when you, like this upcoming game, we'll talk about South Carolina here coming up. But potentially if you have like somebody get into foul trouble or something, I could definitely see Muhammad Diabate or Aiden Sherrill playing a little bit more just due to Colin Murray Boyles and Nick Pringle, right? You have a little bit better post presence this upcoming game versus last game. As I mentioned, Oklahoma just does not have much by way of post presence. So a much smaller lineup is what kind of it asks for. So that is the big thing when you're looking at the different teams you're going to play in the SEC that our roster really does for us is it allows us to play the guys that are going to be best for that specific moment. And you don't have to play the exact same roster, exact same rotation every game. And I think that's going to be really helpful because it's going to be a long grind of SEC play, and winning on the road in the SEC is going to be very, very tough. I'm recording this on Tuesday night, and we have already seen Kentucky go down as well as Tennessee go down on the road. And, again, winning on the road in the SEC play is going to be very, very tough this year. So that is the big thing to note. There's no easy games. So that's what happens against Oklahoma. Like I said, Alabama puts it together. I don't think we need to dive too much into this game. I think the big thing is Alabama dominates the glass. Alabama is able to control their will, and Alabama plays, honestly, very good defense. And this is probably the best defensive performance against a pretty good team that we've seen. The question, we will see how good Oklahoma really is by the end of the year, because Oklahoma had played such a poor non-conference schedule that I think the 13-0 ranking was a bit understated just due to the fact that they had not played the level of competition. But we will see, what that means. But nevertheless, Alabama does play pretty good defense in this game. Alabama gives up just 79 points on 77 possessions. So, just over 1 point per possession while putting up a 1.39, which is just absolutely blazing. So that will play absolutely. And is good enough for Alabama to win this game and win this game going away. So we will go over to the South Carolina game, and just want to give a few of my thoughts on this South Carolina game. I'll give a quick prediction, and then we'll get right out of here. So for the South Carolina game, I think that the first thing that we need to note is this is the second game against back-to-back game against a player that was on Alabama's roster last season. Muhammad Wagee got his Final Four ring in the pregame. I expect that Pringle will get his in the pregame this week. I know that we also gave Davin Cosby his when we played Wake Forest in the exhibition. It really feels like Nate's making it a point to get these guys their Final Four rings, when we're playing their opposing teams, just so that these guys get the recognition for helping us get to where they got and the recognition that they deserve. So I fully expect that to happen for Pringle before this game, and that this is kind of a, coming home of sorts. Obviously, he's from South Carolina, so he's playing with his hometown team, but Alabama coming to play against South Carolina, with Alabama, obviously Pringle having played a large role on Alabama's team last season. Obviously, he sees himself in a different role this year, but it's obviously really, really cool to see Nick Pringle. It's somebody that I know that Nate really likes, and I know a lot of the guys do as well. So when we're looking at South Carolina, the big thing to note is South Carolina technically is currently ranked as the worst team in the SEC. due to the fact that they have 4 losses. Um, there's a little bit of an argument to be made that South Carolina still has a decent win. They have a win in overtime against Clemson at home, and that win is, I think, going to go a long way. I think Clemson is a pretty good team. I know Clemson obviously has the big win against Kentucky at home as well, and I think that South Carolina is a team that, like any team in the league, can be tough to play at home, right? And I think one of the reasons why they can also be tough to play at home is they get to the line. And as we know with the SEC, sometimes there's a lot of fouls called. And depending upon how a game is called, it sometimes will benefit the home team, right? If the home team gets set to the line, it either can break the momentum of the away team, it can get the home crowd into it, etc. And so because of that, I think that South Carolina is a team that you really just have to take seriously when they play at home. And obviously on the road, I think that this is not going to be one of the best teams in the country by any stretch of the imagination. I think that they struggle a bit to find scoring outside of Colin Murray Boyles. I think that when they're playing their best, Nick Pringle actually is playing a pretty big role. And he's been pretty successful. We know Nick can be very efficient. I would not call him a super elite postman, but he definitely has the ability to go straight up and defend with some of the better games, especially when he is on. We saw that in some of the Final Four run. When Nick's playing on one leg and just is giving it his absolute everything. And Nick has been a big role for Alabama over the past few years. He's a super efficient guy just due to the fact that he plays above the rim a lot of dunks. So, he leads the team in field goal percentage, which doesn't surprise me at all. Him and Colin Murray Boyles, I know, get to the line a good bit. Pringle actually gets to the line the most in the entire country from a free throw rate perspective. He's number one in America as it comes to free throw rate. I know that Colin Murray Boyles also is fairly high on that list. Neither guy is a great free throw shooter, which is not what you want to see when you have guys that go to the line as often as they do. But the fact that they get the attempts up is something that you kind of want to note about this team. They do have a couple of three-point shooters this season. Jacoby Wright, Jamari Thomas. Miles Studi actually is not going to play in this game. He's a career 38% three-point shooter. I know over the past few years he's been 8 points a game roughly the past few seasons at South Carolina. But he is on the report to not play in this game. So I do think that does impact them a bit because that would give them another veteran guard, another guy who can make threes. He's been a starter for them in every game this season. So this is going to be the first time that they're going to be replacing Studi in their starting lineup, which is something to note. And for a team that is going to be facing an Alabama team that has a good guard rotation, I think that is definitely something that we just want to keep an eye on because I think that the strength of the South Carolina team is their bigs. And because of that, I don't know what impact that Studi being out is going to have in this game, right? I know he has not been as elite of a scorer this season as he, has been in some previous years, but he still is a 25 minutes a game guy. He's still a guard that plays a lot of big minutes, has played a lot of basketball over the last few years, and not having him definitely concerns me from a South Carolina standpoint. Also, in their last game against Mississippi State, South Carolina just got completely dominated, and they did it defensive rebounding, right? Defensive rebounding was the big place where Mississippi State kind of just dominated them. Mississippi State committed more fouls. Mississippi State had, slightly less turnovers. It was 10-14. So that was actually not a big difference. But Mississippi State has 32 defensive rebounds, so just 21 for South Carolina. And, combine that with a really good 2-point percentage. Mississippi State goes 73%, whereas South Carolina just puts up 38%. And it ends up with just a dominating win that Mississippi State comes up with. When I look at those stats, that really scares me from a South Carolina standpoint and really makes me think that Alabama is going to have a lot of success in this game because as we talked about all year, Alabama is an elite 2-point shooting team. Alabama is, in fact, one of the best in the entire country at 2-point. Currently, they are number one in America at 2-point percentage, averaging about 63% a game. If South Carolina is not able to be successful in the paint, right? If they're not able to be able to have the success that I think that they're going to be looking for, and they have a lower 2-point shooting night than what maybe they're accustomed to. Think about that Mississippi State game. If they have a sub 50% 2-point shooting night, I think that South Carolina is just going to run out of steam. I just think that they're not going to have the amount of scoring needed to take on this Alabama team. How deep they are, how many people they can rotate, the lack of guard play due to missing Stute. I just think overall, I think Alabama's going to have a lot of success in this game, and I would expect that Alabama wins this game and actually wins it fairly comfortably. I don't think that Alabama blows them out completely. I think that it's maybe a 10 to 15 point game. So I think that Alabama wins comfortably. It would not shock me if it was a blowout, but if it was a blowout, it would require obviously a very good shooting night from 3 for Alabama. But I do think that Alabama is going to win this game and win it comfortably, just because I do not think that South Carolina is going to be able to find the scoring that they need as well as the guard play that they need to be able to take on Alabama with how we're able to rotate and how we're able to play the amount of skill players that we are. So I think that South Carolina does slow this game down. I think Alabama is going to be able to try to push the pace as much as they can. South Carolina's only had a couple of games up in the 70 possession range. 2 of the games they lost actually were those faster paced games against Xavier and Indiana. I would kind of expect this game to be similar to the Indiana score earlier in the season by South Carolina. Something in the 86-71, 86-70 range. I think that's where I would look to see this game happen for Alabama. I do think this is going to be a tough place to play on the road. I think that Alabama needs to show that they're capable of going into a tough, hostile road environment and being successful. But I do think that Alabama can win this game and should win this game. So that's all I have to say. I know it's a short episode. Sorry for the shorter episode. As I've said, my voice is just gone with the sickness. Hopefully I will be over this. I got some medicine earlier today, as well as some shots. So hopefully I'm feeling better, and I will put out a more proper episode with a little bit more in-depth recaps going into that Texas A&M game, and I'll talk a little bit about the first week of basketball throughout the league and what the standings look like. So I really appreciate everyone for watching the episodes, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.